We're going to be talking about emergency preparedness during COVID-19 for young adults with disabilities. And this is through the Arizona Statewide Independent Living Council. So our agenda for today is we're going to be talking about how to make the most of your Zoom learning experience, so everyone knows how to navigate Zoom. What is COVID-19 and how it started? What steps can you take to prevent COVID-19? How and why you should create an evacuation plan? How do you create an emergency communication plan? How do you create an emergency supply kit? Where can you find more resources, and how to advocate during COVID-19? And first, we're going to talk about the Zoom features. We have closed captions available for today's presentation. To access the captions, look for the menu on the bottom of the Zoom screen and click the CC button. You can change the size of the captions in Zoom preferences. This presentation is available on the phone or online. And to make this presentation accessible by phone, we're going to read aloud all the presentation slides. And we made sure to use only a couple of images, and we will describe those aloud for anyone unable to view the slides. And we will also we're reading all of the presentation slides for those who can't see the slides. Troubleshooting issues, common problems when first using Zoom can be your audio output and computer volume. We are recording this Zoom session, and we can send a link to the recording to anyone who registered for the session. If you encounter problems with your audio during this session, you can test your speakers in the Zoom preferences under audio. If this doesn't work, you can try accessing the session with a different device, such as calling into the session with your cell phone. You can also use the chat option too if you're having troubles with audio.
Alrighty, so obviously we are in the middle of a pandemic, specifically the COVID-19 pandemic. So on this slide, we have a timeline of the pandemic and the key events at its beginning. On December 31st of 2019, we had the first reported cases when the Chinese authorities informed the World Health Organization's China office of a pneumonia case in Wuhan City, Hubei Province, China, with an unknown cause. January 7th of this year, COVID-19 was officially identified when China identified a new strain of coronavirus as the cause of this pneumonia outbreak. On January 20th of this year, we had the first case in the US. This was first recorded in an American citizen traveling from Wuhan, China to his home in Washington State. And then the next day, on January 21st, is the first recorded human transmission of the virus confirmed by the World Health Organization. So, where did COVID-19 come from? It's uncertain. There are several theories, none of which are widely accepted. The main one that you've probably heard is that in late 2019, someone at the Huan seafood market in Wuhan was infected with COVID-19 from an animal at the market, possibly a bat. Although there has been one conspiracy theory, because less than 300 yards away from this seafood market is the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So another theory is that there was an accidental leak from this institute, but so far there is no evidence at all to support this theory?
So what is COVID-19? So COVID-19 is a respiratory illness. The most common symptoms include shortness of breath, fever, and coughing. But there's really there's a wide range of symptoms that people have experienced, but these are the most common ones. Other symptoms include nausea, loss of taste and smell, like aches in your muscles, things like that. And really the time that you experience these symptoms can be anywhere from 2 to 14 days after you've been exposed. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. So COVID-19 is spread through respiratory droplets, and these droplets are produced by coughing, sneezing, or talking. So you can catch the virus by breathing in the droplets produced by someone who has the virus, or if you touch a surface that has these droplets on it and then touch your mouth, nose, or eyes. That's why it's recommended by the CDC and public health not to touch the face. So the reproductive number is a term that means the transmission rate, and it basically means if one person is infected, how many people will they infect or they likely to infect. And this is the number of new cases stemming from each COVID-19 infection. And it has a wide range of 2.2 to 6.5. And the reason that the range is so wide is because of the time that it takes for the symptoms to kick in for someone that's infected, which is 2 to 14 days. And the problem with that is, say it's been 10 days and you don't have any symptoms, but you're infected. You just don't know it because you don't have any symptoms. You could be unknowingly spreading COVID-19 and not being aware of it due to the fact that you're asymptomatic. So that's why the reproductive number is such a wide range. And for illness outcomes, county-specific fatality rates varied from 0.5% to 3.6% compared to seasonal flu, which is typically 0.1% in the US. 0.5% may not seem like a large number, but when you consider it as fatality rates, it's actually quite a large number of people that can die due to this illness. Preventing the spread of COVID-19, avoiding exposure is the only sure way to prevent COVID-19. There's a picture of someone wiping a cabinet with disinfectant spray and a cloth. So hand washing and disinfecting. Hands should be washed often with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, and commonly touched surfaces should be cleaned and disinfected daily. There was a notable difference between cleaning and disinfecting surfaces. Most people like clean surfaces, like getting the surface dirt off, but disinfecting is ensuring that like pathogens and COVID-19 pathogens such as that is getting wiped off and truly like disinfected from the surfaces. So you should just make sure to really disinfect commonly touched surfaces such as doorknobs, light switches. Your phones is a big one too. You're touching your phone a lot, and a lot of times I see people like at the grocery store, they have gloves, they have face masks, but they're touching things in the store, and then they touch their phone and they put their phone to their face. And that's not an effective way to ensure that you're being safe and reducing the spread of COVID-19, because you're putting your phone, which has all these germs on your face. Face masks and other PPE. There's a picture of a woman coughing with a face mask on. Cloth face masks are recommended for any time you cannot maintain social distancing. Masks are not just for when you are sick. Especially now, masks are being used whenever you're going out in public and when you think that it's not going, and when you think that you're going to be in contact with people. So I have a cloth mask with me, and usually how you would put a cloth mask on. This is the one that most people have. You put it just around your ears and make sure that there's a seal, and it should fit on the bridge of your nose. And this just ensures that droplets aren't being exposed to you. So it just really helps. There are also temporary face masks, and there's N95 masks that you can use. So really just make sure that you have proper protection. Gloves aren't needed for when you're going to the grocery store and stuff like that, but masks are always a good thing to have.
Okay, so in emergency preparedness, there are 3 types of evacuation. There is the quick evacuation from the home, such as in the case of a house fire. When you do this, you need to consider the quickest and easiest paths to take to all of the exits, and you should always ensure that there are clear paths to these exits at all times. The other is evacuating from a home area, such as a wildfire, flooding, or other kind of natural disaster. You should keep in mind what supplies you need to bring with you. You should create a checklist create a checklist of these in advance. There's also an evacuation from a public place, such as a fire in a public building. The important thing to ask here is if you are capable of exiting the building on your own, and just try to avoid spaces that are not accessible. There have been tragic stories I've seen in the news of people who perished in fires because they were like in a wheelchair and there were no ramps or working elevators. So it's important to keep these things in mind, especially if your disability involves a need for accessibility.
Emergency communication plan, those 3 steps with emergency communication. First, communicating with first responders, then communicating with loved ones, then communicating with service providers. So communicating with first responders. What information do first responders need from you? How will you communicate this information quickly and as simply as possible? Consider carrying a card in your wallet that contains important information. So when communicating with first responders, I find that carrying a card can be very useful. My mom has an emergency card in case she experiences a seizure, so that they know about her condition and what medication she uses and things like that. Communication codes aren't just for people who have a condition, but it's particularly useful if you may have trouble, if you could have trouble communicating with someone, like you need a special communication device, or if you're hard of hearing, or something like that. Also, medications and just explaining your condition is really helpful, so they can get you the help they need, is the help that you need, as quick as possible. Um, Communicating with loved ones. You might not be with your loved ones when an emergency happens. How will you get in touch with them? Consider having emergency phone numbers written down in case you do not have access to your cell phone or the battery is dead. Consider having a prearranged meeting place with members of your household or by your home. A lot of the times people take advantage of the fact that they have all their phone numbers like on their phone, but in a lot of cases you may lose your phone or you may not have access to your phone in emergency situations. So really, people that you need to contact in an emergency, you should really have those numbers written down or even memorized, just so you can get a hold of them if you need to. Also, a prearranged meeting place is very useful. You should actually have different meeting places based on the scale of the emergency, like one just outside your house, like a place that you all know, one in your like outside your neighborhood, and then one outside of the larger region. So say like across the street, if across the street at a specific building, or maybe outside the neighborhood, just a place that you all can agree on to make sure that you guys can meet up if you don't have a way to communicate. Also, communicating with service providers. Individuals who have disabilities often rely on supports and services to maintain their independence. If you have a personal care attendant, have you communicated your health and safety needs with your PCA or to a service that provides your PCAs? What steps have they taken to prevent the spread of COVID-19? If you use electricity-dependent equipment, have you notified your power provider? So a lot of the times, personal care attendants may be considered your family, or they may be hired, but either way, you just need to make sure that you communicated like your health and safety needs, and you guys have an emergency plan that you guys have communicated with together. Sometimes sometimes you may not always need a PCA, but you need to assume when you have in an emergency, when planning for an emergency, you need to assume that your condition will be it'll be like one of your bad days for your condition, like the lowest form of mobility and things like that, because you need to prepare for the worst and make sure that you have a way to mobilize and a way to get out of that emergency when you need to. What steps have they taken to prevent the spread of COVID-19? You need to make sure, like, if you have you need to make sure that if your service provider, if they're seeing other patients, that they're doing the disinfecting they need to do, and they're taking the right steps, the right precautions to really minimize the spread of COVID-19. Even if they're a provider that's reputable, you just need to make sure that they're taking the right steps, because it's affecting your health, so it's within your realm of responsibility. Also, with electricity-dependent equipment, a lot of the times your electricity provider, if you let them know that you have certain needs for your medical equipment to be charged. If there's a power outage, they'll contact you and tell you the best place to charge your medical equipment, and they'll also offer to get first responders there to you if you need them. So it's a good thing it's a good resource to have. Emergency preparedness on college campuses. So this is always a good thing to keep in mind, like the emergency preparedness resources they have, just so if there's an emergency, you can be safe. So university police alerts. In most universities, you can sign up for police alerts through your phone and email and be aware of shootings or crimes happening by campus. A lot of the times there are police departments dedicated for that specific campus that you go to. And you can sign up for all of the campuses in Arizona. You can sign up for police alerts, so you know what areas to avoid if a crime's happening or if there's a dangerous situation on campus happening. And blue light emergency call boxes. There's a picture of one of these. It's blue and like a rectangular shape, and it says emergency in white letters written on it, and there's an option to push a button. So all throughout most campuses, you can light them when you are in danger, and the university police can track you through the last button you pushed and get to you and get you to safety. So a lot of the times what happens when someone feels like they're being followed or in a dangerous or threatening situation, they'll just walk or run and try to get away from the situation and push the closest emergency call box to them. And what will happen is as they push the different call boxes, the university police can follow them. And it's just really useful, and it's actually helped a lot of people get out of dangerous situations. Safe refuge areas. If someone who has a disability is not able to evacuate on their own and is alone in a building, there are safe refuge areas labeled in buildings and residence halls that are resistant to natural disasters. These areas all have different names for different universities, so you can check on your university website. But basically, being in that area, it's very useful because if you are unable to get out of the building, the first responders are told to look in those areas, and they have just high resistance for natural disasters like fires and things like that. So it'll just buy you more time if you're in a tough situation and no one's there to help you get out of the building.
So, as I mentioned a few slides back, you need to have a supply list prepared for for if there is ever a need to evacuate or your home or shelter in place. For first aid supplies, this can range from Band-Aids to N95 masks. If you need it, include durable medical equipment and extra supplies of your medication. I know for me, I have really severe ADHD, so I rely on my medication a lot so that I can just do executive functioning stuff. Food and water. 2 weeks worth of food and water is recommended. The recommendation used to be 3 days, but now that we're going through this pandemic, the recommendation is at least 2 weeks. If you're on a tight budget, even if you can only buy an extra can of soup or, just small amounts of non-perishables, that is still enough. Just have a backup supply. And of course, important documents such as birth certificate, social security paperwork, medical documents. Have these stored in multiple places. Have extra copies, have them digitally stored on flash drives or in cloud storage, because these are super important things to have.
Where to find more resources. So we have some important phone numbers. The COVID-19 hotline. This is for Arizona if you have any issues with COVID-19. Arizona Center for Disability Law. If you feel as though your rights aren't being met for a disability you have, this is the number to call. National Domestic Violence Hotline. A lot of public health officials are anticipating a rise in domestic violence just due to the stress of COVID-19. Like those multiple stressors that are going to be increased by COVID-19 due to financial stress or relationship stress. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, that's always a good resource to have. Just make sure to keep track of your mental health during this time, because these are rough times. Websites we have are Administration for Community Living, Arizona Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, Arizona Department of Health Services, Arizona Together. They can really help you if you're having a tough time. They can help you with Meals on Wheels and things like that. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. This is a great resource this is a great website to go on to just to get more information about COVID-19, such as proper things you should do to have proper precautions you should have for limiting the spread of COVID-19 and stopping yourself and your family members from getting infected. Just general information about the virus. National Alliance on Mental Illness. NAMI is a great website. Just, again, keeping track of your mental health during these tough times. U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. This is a good resource for trying to find cleaning, disinfecting tools, especially if you are known to have allergic reactions and you're sensitive to the disinfecting tools and cleaners that people have commonly been using. They offer other more safe alternatives if you're sensitive to the common ones, and WebMD. So.
Now, if there is now this slide is how to advocate during COVID-19. Especially in the most difficult of times as a society, it is imperative that we advocate for ourselves and for our communities. There are two categories of advocacy. You have systems advocacy, which involve responding to public comment requests, survey input, reaching out to committees or councils in your local government. Businesses, you can fill out customer surveys and online contract forms, and volunteering or donating to nonprofits. Then you have individual and group advocacy. At home, ask yourself if you are more vulnerable to COVID-19 or if you live with others who are not at work, are there workplace accommodations for those who have had COVID-19 or for those who are vulnerable to getting it? And at school, what accommodations are there? Or at your school's child care or an adult day centers for vulnerable individuals? And of course, it is along with advocacy, sort of tying into the systems advocacy part, or it is so important that if we have a problem with how this pandemic is being handled, or if there is something we think that should be done, that we reach out to our elected officials, because that is the best way to ensure that we are being taken care of. On this page, I have the phone number for the office of Governor Doug Ducey, the phone numbers and the phone numbers for the various offices of Senators Martha McSally and Kirsten Sinema, and a link to the Arizona Secretary of State Katie Hobbs' website, where you can register to vote. This last one is extremely important because if these elected officials are not doing an adequate job, or if you think, or if they are and you think they should continue to be doing such good work, it is imperative that we make sure our voices are heard and that we let them be heard. Voting is the most important and most effective way to ensure that we have a government that works for all of us. And all of these numbers and the link are included in the slideshow, which has been emailed out to all of you. And then the last slide is our contact information, which again, these are all available on the slideshow that has been emailed to you. But if you need to reach out to us, you can always go to our website at azsilk.org or email Sarah Ann.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Grace and Tyler, for your presentation today. I'm so happy to have, we have 10 people joining us. And so I just want to allow some time for questions and answers. This is just a Zoom meeting, so you are able to ask questions through the chat, but you're also able to ask questions if you're on the phone and if you're on video. So I'm going to play with the settings, and that kind of allows you guys to turn your options on mute or off mute, and that way you can chime in with any questions you have about individual emergency preparedness or COVID-19. Okay, it says on my end that people are allowed to unmute themselves now. So if you have any questions for us, please, we would love to hear them.
So regarding, I thought of this during Grace's slide talking about campus safety and just communicating with first responders. Obviously, over the past couple of days, we have seen that there are many people in our nation who have a strained relationship with law enforcement, to say the least, and there are many communities who and individuals who feel uncomfortable around cops. So how do those sorts of people who either have that strained relationship or that discomfort or are more susceptible to systemic violence and oppression from law enforcement, how do they, in emergencies, what would you suggest they do, in terms of ensuring safety, but also acknowledging that there is a lot of distrust and strained relationships between our first responders and our communities?
Absolutely. I have my answer to that, but I want to make sure that Grace doesn't have an answer that she wants to give first, since it was her slide. Do you feel comfortable with me giving it, or do you have an answer?
I don't have an answer, but I do have something to add after you're done answering.
Okay. This is something that is really hard for government to acknowledge. It's even working in public health, it's another agency, it's another branch that is law enforcement. And so I have noticed just personally that there is a hesitation to address the issue. And I want to applaud Tyler for bringing it up, because, after us witnessing things like the George Floyd murder a couple of days ago, it's made this such a more apparent issue that we all just have to address as a nation. And, we just, on my perspective as working in public health, we have taken this into consideration and have been for the last few years. It's changed things, like we have a workbook that's about individual emergency preparedness that was made in 2013. It's getting updated this year for 2020. And we have changed wording that had made just call 911 as the first response. As an individual with disabilities, there has been altercations between law enforcement and our community that were unnecessary. And it was just a lack of awareness, maybe a little bit on both sides, but obviously it's more the agency's responsibility to have that awareness of the disability community, and it shouldn't be the responsibility of the individual who has the disability to be aware. But there are some recommendations I can give for the individual who has the disability. Having things like your communication card that could explain something going on that might look unusual. Individuals might have a problem when they're pulled over and have to do some kind of DUI test. They might normally have mobility issues, for example, and balance issues. And so some of those tests just really don't work for them. And, it gives you a lot more validity in that moment with an officer and trust if you had something, permanent with you like that explained you had this condition. So I feel bad having to have that recommendation, because I don't feel like it should be your responsibility, but having those things and preparing like that will avoid more encounters that are negative with police. I would also recommend that you develop a large support network. The first phone call doesn't necessarily have to be to 911. There are situations that are just mental health situations. And we have had tragic incidences even in Arizona where, one example that I'm afraid I can't remember the location, in northern Arizona, a woman had an axe. And I bet that looked really scary. I don't necessarily disagree with the police officers having responded in the way that they shot her and killed her. But that even though I understand their perspective, it's also something we could have avoided overall, that situation. And so having support on both sides, from the individual who has a disability to take, when you can, some preventive measure, but then also as anybody working like myself that works in this arena of government, nonprofit agencies, we really need to work more to build awareness. And I can tell you, it, especially after the events recently, it's a top priority. It is, before Grace goes, was there any questions to that? Okay, thank you so much, Tyler. Grace.
An alternative to the like when you're in an unsafe situation at U of A, there is a option, or if you feel like you're going to enter an unsafe situation, I should say, because you shouldn't use this service during an emergency, but if you feel unsafe, there's this thing called Safe Ride, and it's kind of like an Uber for around campus. Someone can drive you to a place in campus that you need to go. Say if it's like at night, or if you're just in unsafe, like if you feel like you're going to be in an unsafe situation, and they are not police officers. But again, like this wouldn't work for like an emergency, but it may be helpful to you. So
we do have we have a similar thing at the ASU various ASU campuses as well. So thank you for bringing that up.
And is there any other questions? Well, I want to thank you guys so much for participating on a weekend too. It means a lot to us, and we will edit this recording and hopefully share it out. But we just to make sure, I always say hopefully because it takes some editing process, and make sure that it all got recorded. And then if it did, we'll post it to YouTube. But either way, you're going to get an email from us that contains, again, these slides, but also an accessible version of these slides that are just text only on Word, just in case anyone needed an accessible format. So again, thank you so much. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at sarahann@azsilc.org. So thank you, Grace, Tyler.